The now is more important than past or future, because you realize it is life itself. In the normal state of consciousness, certainly past and future are more important than now. So the normal state of consciousness, which is unconsciousness, is characterized by that, the implicit assumption or belief that past and future are more important and more powerful than now. And then a moment comes when you realize the now is all there ever is. In truth, life can only be now. Then you honor life by honoring this moment. And then, whereas before the now existed in some obscure region on the periphery of your life, you were only peripherally aware of it because you were so absorbed in past and future. Now, past and future become peripheral. Yes, they still have, to some extent, they are needed to move in this world. You as this form, you can't get out of that where you seem to be flowing in that stream of time, which is like a train you're on and it won't stop. You can't get off. I recently saw people that I hadn't seen in 15 or 20 years. 20, I think. It's a little shocking what time does to the human form. On that level, yes, it seems to exist. And I almost felt inclined to say, my God, what did time do to you? Yes, on the level of form, you as this form, you are subject to time. And subject to the impermanence which implies time, short-lived, fleeting, all forms. Everything, every form is quite fleeting. When you're totally identified with the form, you don't really know that. You only exist in a state of fear and desire because so identified. You don't know. And it's an amazing realization when you realize how fleeting all forms are, that knowing is already the beginning of liberation. Not as an intellectual fact or belief, but to see how short-lived all forms are. And when you grow older, you see it very clearly when you reach the age of 60, 65, 70, 75. People around you begin to die, one after another. My mother says there's nobody left now that I know. They're all gone. And then, of course, you see it everywhere, in every natural form. Now, the seeing of that, when you see it, you realize it, that is already liberating. Because that seeing arises from that which is beyond form. If the entire world were green, the color green would not exist, because there would be nothing to differentiate it from. If everything were fleeting, you wouldn't even know it. But the fact that you know means there's something that is not fleeting. And that is why to contemplate the short-lived, impermanent nature of all forms is already liberating. And when it's contemplated and allowed to be, and this may mean at this moment, a form that's right in front of you, shows signs of the passing of time. It's become wrinkled. It could be a mango, it could be an apple, or it could be the human form. It's very similar. What happens to an apple is what happens to the human form. What time does to an apple and what time does to a human. Very similar when you look a fresh apple and a fresh young 20-year-old. All shiny, and then time does its work, and 50 years later, which isn't very much, it's all wrinkled. But with humans, there's the potential in that for the flowering of consciousness through the fading form. Now, I don't know about the apple. The apple can only speak for itself. But I know that for humans, that is a great potential is hidden here, and there's another portal here into the liberated state. And that portal is this form that is moving towards dissolution. Of course, all forms are. And suddenly you see it. Not only here, but you see it everywhere. And when there is no reaction, you allow that. There's something incredibly peaceful in watching the form arise and dissolve. And that which knows that is beyond form. That is why there are certain works in literature, they never talk about anything that is beyond form, but they show you the impermanent nature of life, and they are spiritual works. It is already spiritual, you don't need to talk about anything that is beyond the impermanent nature. Just to show you the impermanent nature is spiritual, because it makes you into the seer of that. So there are those Shakespeare sonnets, talk a lot about how beauty fades, how quickly what time does to it. And to read it can be a spiritual experience, because it puts you into the position of seeing impermanence. And even something that is not, you might think it's just entertainment, and on one level it is. Even a film like Titanic, where you see what all these forms that die, and at the very end they appear again like actors on stage. They played their role. And you see how death, you're watching death. So one could say what we really talk about is death. The form dissolves. Death. Now there's a saying in a sacred scripture which says, "Die before you die." And there's deep truth in that, and in a way this is another perspective on why we are here, what this gathering is about. One could put it like this: death will find you. It's found you already, because we're all slowly dying. And eventually it'll catch up with you. Now find death before it finds you. And that's the essence of spiritual practice, is finding death, embracing death, which is the end of identification with form, the end of deriving your sense of self, identity, from form, because that is the normal state of consciousness. And the identification with form is twofold. The physical form, identifying with the appearance of the body And some people have that very strongly, that a large part of their sense of self is to do with identification with the physical form. And then you have the psychological form that you identify with as thought structures and emotions that accompany those thought structures, accumulated content of the mind, images of who I am, what the world has told me about who I am, the surrounding culture has told me about who I am. Or I may have reacted against what the surrounding culture has told me about who I am, but I'm still not free in that, because even the reaction is a conditioned reaction. So there's the psychological form of me, which is me and my story, which may be mostly a personal story. It may be mixed up with a collective story of us, me and my tribe, my nation, my religion. It's the story of me. That is the psychological form of me. And everybody has their story, that is the me. And everybody knows that the me lives in a state of dissatisfaction with its story. It is a characteristic of the story not to be at ease or fulfilled for very long. It is not in the nature of that story-based identity to be at peace, fulfilled, or free. The very structure of it goes against that. The very structure of that kind of identity doesn't allow it. It's based on fighting something or someone, being at odds with something or someone. It's based on a sense of separateness. It needs that. So the identification with the body, sometimes they become very much mixed. You may identify with the appearance of the physical body, and that the mental images may form as me, as such and such. So especially people who have a beautiful body or good appearance, their psychological me is strongly bound up with their mental image of body. And for a while that gives people a very pleasant sense of self. Sense of self always is comparative, whether it's to do with body or with other identifications. You will compare yourself to others and then see where you fit in your identity. There is an attempt to be more than others in the story-based. And if you cannot be more because you're better, greater, know more, look better, or stronger, whatever it may be, if you cannot be more there, then what's left to you, you can be more miserable than others. And that also works. And some people have that strongly. If they can't create a satisfying identity in having more knowledge or more beauty or more physical strength or more money than others, then at least I can feel more miserable and have a self-image of one that has been treated unfairly by life. That's very satisfying. Because now you know who you are. So just and then you seek to confirm that story-based, image-based identity by selectively interpreting life around you. You begin to see only those things that conform with your sense of identity. There's selective interpretations of reality and selective perception, and everything that you perceive as you move about your life is totally filtered and distorted then through the self-image of me. And only those things that conform to it are allowed in, that strengthen the self-image. And so everything is interpreted according to that. And you think that's reality. But it's the conditioned, heavy filters through which you interact with people. And then, so it becomes like a script in here that's been put into here, and you act it out. And that becomes then your life situation, your life drama, your life story. And you go through the movements, looking for more of you, through more, adding more future, never finding it. And then it could happen that you're suddenly confronted with death close to you, someone close to you, or the possibility of imminent death that might happen to this form, or you're suddenly confronted with great loss in your life, which is another form of death, something you had identified with. Status, possessions, relationships, great loss. And suddenly, forms dissolve. Forms in which there was the self. The self was in those forms, and those forms dissolve through some disaster, some form of death. And sometimes it affects even the mind forms with which you had identified, because the trauma and the shock is such that it shakes the rigid mind patterns that before were running you and pretending to be you, and suddenly those also die. You don't know who you are anymore, you can't explain it anymore. Before you thought you had these ready opinions. When people asked you, you would put out your opinions, you knew it all. And suddenly something comes, and suddenly the explanations don't suffice anymore. Death. That wasn't supposed to happen. Some religious people begin to doubt their beliefs when somebody close to them suddenly dies. That wasn't supposed to happen. I had a contract with God, and there was not supposed to be any death. Form dies. Thought forms die. And the whole story-based identity can come to an end in the face of great loss or death. Your whole story doesn't make sense anymore. Any great loss or death in your life has that potential, but not always is that potential realized. It can also happen that great loss or disaster can make the story more heavy, more miserable, and more unhappy. But the greatest potential is always death, and wonderful portal is when a form dissolves. Or you see the dissolving form. It may not have dissolved yet, but it's moving there, so the portal is beginning to open. And suddenly, the form is gone, and it leaves a hole and emptiness. Someone close to you dies. You lose your entire possessions, whatever it may be. A hole is left, there was the beautiful fabric of your existence, your life story. Maybe it was all in place. Because some people, for a few years in their lives, they have it all arranged so neatly that you look at their lives and says, how is it possible? Everything in his or her life seems to work so well. It's rare, but occasionally you see it. It's like a picture book. A family, 2 children, both doing well, happy marriage, beautiful house, good job, promotions, status in society, 2 or 3 big cars. It's too much. Usually when you scratch and look beyond the surface, you find something else. But let's just say that yes, they are happy in that they have neatly arranged their life situation in such a way that everything seems to be working. And it's only a question of time before something in there collapses. Because the structures that they have created that look so solid, all these life insurance policies, huge corporations are sustaining me with billions of dollars behind them, and I have shares in that. Surely my life is now secure, and my family's life is secure. There's a true foundation. And then time does something to the seemingly solid structures. Such a shock when the disaster happened on September 11th. This huge structure, so solid. And it took only a few madmen and they collapsed. And so, to some, it's only a question of time before something comes in somewhere. The solidity of those structures will reveal itself as illusory. It will start to crumble somewhere.